And next up, we continue our series with the Charity Learning Consortium. And this month, Michelle Parry-Slater is talking to the Children's Society. We're talking to Natasha Welbourne and Kat Brandt around the complete restructure of their talent development programme. So no small undertaking. Enjoy.
Last time on Learning Now TV, I was talking to you about how we need to use the data and how we need to use the data to get our foundations right. So I'm super excited to have the Children's Society with us today because they really have looked into getting those foundations right. From those foundations, they can set up for future success. But it's enough of me talking about what they're going to tell you. Let's hear it from the horse's mouth, so to speak. So welcome, Tash. Welcome, Kat. Do tell us a little bit about who you are and what you do. Tash?
Hi there, I'm Natasha Welbourne. I'm the Talent Development Specialist at the Children's Society.
And I'm Kat Brandt. I'm the Talent Development Partner at the Children's Society. Thanks for having us today.
You're very welcome. Big focus on talent and those foundations, really. Talk us through, who are the Children's Society? What do you actually do?
So the Children's Society is a charity that's been set up in the UK for a very long time. We're over 150 years old, and we work to support and empower young people across England in really difficult situations. A lot of our programmes and services cover things like child sexual exploitation, children's rights and advocacy, county lines and criminal exploitation, as well as mental health, people missing from home, poverty and so on. We work to try and create hope in their families, in the community, and in the broader sense that they're living in, trying to affect change from both the government level, but also at a local level as well.
So really focusing on some difficult situations there. Well, thank you. Thank you for explaining that. So what internally, what were the issues that you were dealing with rather than externally looking?
So we'd gone through a large period of change around 2020. The organisation restructured and reorganised itself ahead of setting a new strategy leading from 2020 to 2030. So what we came into at that time was a lot of change in the organisation. We'd seen the learning and development environment change significantly. At the time before the restructure, there were support happening in individual teams, lots of different specialists or knowledge groups happening in different parts of the organisation, which meant that there was lots of information, lots of courses, lots of different pieces happening in different places. So when Kat came in, and then myself soon after, we were finding that when those roles were dissolved or changed, that a lot of that information went with the people who left. So it left us with lots of information, but not necessarily a way to store it, not necessarily a way to cleanly share it, and not a way to make advantage of the way that people had been taught before. So a big part of the work that we needed to do is create some consistency in our language, some consistency in how we tracked, and also avoid any confusion over who owned what and where you could find the information.
Okay, so did you have some holes in sort of things? You found that you had some stuff but not others. You didn't have a sort of consistent foundation.
No, not at all. So what we found is that there were a lot of information that was set up for things like COVID and making sure that we had good and active COVID responses through our e-learning systems. But after that, what we found is that some training was stored on our SharePoint, some were shared in old files and old systems and processes. And because we'd lost those people who were looking after them, it was hard to track down exactly where things should be or where they lived. Even harder still was that the budget wasn't centralised. So some teams had lots of different funding and resources available, and other teams didn't have that as funding. So coming into a more central function, we took the time to make sure that we could make sure everything was on a consistent branding, that it was easier to navigate, and that consistency could be in place. What we really wanted to make sure we were doing was making sure that every user had a consistent experience with us, and that they could find the connections to the wider organisation where they needed to, as well as in their own teams. Because when we came in, we found that was just really lacking, and it meant that there was a lack of trust in what they could find when they were coming to look for learning and development opportunities.
It's a little bit of a postcode lottery, really. It just depends which department you landed in as to what your experience was.
Yes.
Okay. So what did you do about that? Did you just start to pool it together, or was there something a little bit more sophisticated?
Initially, what we did was reviewed the content that we had online. So some of the biggest parts that we did were review the resources and collate them all together. There was a larger piece of strategic thinking, though, that took place within this, and I'll hand over to Kat to discuss that in terms of how we then pulled that together and had a consistent plan.
Thanks, Tash. So we started really by listening to people about what their experience was. So that's how we knew that people weren't able to easily access our content, that they were finding it really hard to navigate. Sometimes they'd find a piece of brilliant content, and when they went back to share it, they couldn't find it again. So we really listened to that. We looked at the survey data that we had from around 4-week reviews, from exit interviews and things like that as well. And we really used that to inform how we could connect this with what we were trying to serve our employees with. So a couple of things came into that kind of strategic piece, thinking about how we link what we were doing to the Children's Society as a whole, and really I suppose align the messaging. So as part of the restructure that Tash was talking about, there was a whole branding revamp that happened, that fighting for hope really came through, and that was something that we felt was missing within the L&D brand itself. So we really wanted to make sure that it felt connected to our people and what they're doing every day, and that they were able to easily access that content and feel like they could share it as well with their colleagues, take that information and put it to use, put it into practice, rather than it just sitting on their computer in the back office in a retail store, or sitting on their computer when they're talking to their colleagues.
It sounds a little bit like you were sort of giving energy to this brand of L&D, really, but it sits within a more holistic space. It wasn't just L&D that you were thinking about then. Was this the whole sort of people experience?
Yeah, absolutely. So Michelle Clark, who is our brilliant Executive Director of Diversity and Talent, brought in this people experience framework. And that is really the lens that we see the organisation through as diversity and talent, but we really encourage others to be using that lens as well. And it means that when we're doing something, we're really thinking about the 4 quadrants that make up that people experience framework. So you mentioned, Michelle, getting the basics right. We want to make sure that people have a voice, that they feel valued, and that we have inspirational leadership. So when we're thinking about a piece of work, we're making sure that we're actively bringing those 4 quadrants into the way that we design, and that user experience is a massive part of that.
What was the impact as a result then? You've gone sort of big picture, what about somebody working in your organisation? What did it look like for them? What was their impact? It's
different across different areas of the organisation, to be completely honest. I'd love to say it was fantastic and everything went immediately well. But I think the impact immediately was for our new starters, and that is always going to be a continual work in progress. There's always going to be improvements that we can make to all of our processes. But just coming into what we call the learning zone, which is the Moodle platform, coming in and seeing the branding that feels familiar. It feels like it's really easy to navigate, and I know what's expected of me, at least within my first couple of weeks of joining this Children's Society, but hopefully well beyond that as well. So that's one of the immediate experiences that we've had, is that people felt like they were able to get the right information at the right time when they're first joining us. Beyond that, I think the energy is different across the organisation. So some people that have been here, we've got people who've been working here 15, 20 years. It's a different piece of engagement about trying to draw them back to the platform, because it was really something that people touched on when they needed to do compliance training. And then they left it, they walked away, and they thought learning doesn't happen in that space. So it's really trying to shift that thinking to actually there is useful information here, and it's a great place to start and then build on those topics and those different learnings. So we really try to encourage people to see it as a blended approach. I think the impact there we're still going to be seeing over time. But we are seeing more traffic coming back to the platform. We are seeing people use the resources. And one of the biggest things that we've noticed is teams reaching out to us, subject matter experts reaching out to us and saying, how do I get my content in that platform, because I can see how useful it is, and actually it's going to save me time to be able to have something that's sustainable and really accessible for all of our audiences at the Children's Society. So they're two of the biggest ones, I would say.
It certainly sounds like you're moving towards a learning culture in the organisation, especially if people are now asking and offering content to you. So many times in L&D, we get confused that content equals learning, and that's not true at all. This foundation that you've been talking about here, using the people experience framework, I think it's a really insightful way of making sure you're delivering what needs to be delivered. Thank you so much to Tash and to Kat for talking to us today.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.